The HOA street cleaner dumped 3 tons of wet, rotting leaves directly across my driveway at 7 in the morning on a Saturday. And that's when I knew the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association had officially declared war. I was standing in my kitchen in Portland, Oregon, holding my first cup of coffee and watching through the window as the industrial street sweeper made its second pass down Oakmont Drive. The driver, a balding man in his 50s wearing an orange safety vest, seemed to take particular pleasure in positioning the discharge chute to spray decomposing oak and maple leaves directly onto my property. The wet mass piled up against my garage door, blocking both car bays completely. Some of it even splattered against the white paint of my house. My name is Owen Garrett, and I had moved into this neighborhood exactly 6 months ago, thinking I had found a quiet suburban paradise. The house was a beautiful craftsman-style home with a large backyard that sloped down toward a drainage creek. I worked from home as a software engineer, and the peaceful setting seemed perfect for the quiet life I wanted after years of apartment living in downtown Portland. The first sign of trouble had come 3 weeks after I moved in. A letter appeared in my mailbox, printed on expensive cardstock with the Riverside Meadows HOA logo embossed at the top. It informed me that my mailbox was the wrong shade of black and needed to be repainted to match the approved color palette within 30 days or face a $50 fine. I had measured the paint myself using a color matcher at the hardware store, and it was identical to every other mailbox on the street. But apparently, someone with too much time on their hands had decided otherwise. I repainted the mailbox anyway, not wanting to start my tenure in the neighborhood with conflict. That was my first mistake. The second letter came 2 weeks later. My grass was 1.5 inches tall instead of the approved maximum of 1 inch. Another $50 fine. Never mind that I had just mowed 3 days earlier, and we had received unusual amounts of rain that week, causing everything to grow faster than normal. The third letter arrived after I put up a small bird feeder in my front yard. Apparently, bird feeders were classified as unapproved decorative structures and required written permission from the HOA board. The fine for this infraction was $100. Each letter was signed by the same person, Patricia Moorehouse, HOA president. I had met Patricia once, briefly, at a neighborhood barbecue. She was a woman in her late 40s with severely cut blonde hair that looked like it had been styled with a ruler. She wore a pantsuit to a casual backyard gathering and spent the entire time taking photos of people's yards with her phone, making notes in a leather-bound planner. I had tried to be reasonable. I paid the fines, followed the rules, and kept my head down. But the letters kept coming. My trash can was visible from the street for 15 minutes longer than allowed on collection day. My holiday lights were up 2 days past the January 5th deadline. My car was parked facing the wrong direction in my own driveway, which apparently violated some obscure traffic ordinance that the HOA had adopted into their bylaws. By the time autumn rolled around, I had paid over $800 in fines, and my patience was completely exhausted. That's when the leaf situation started. Portland gets a lot of rain in the fall, and the mature trees lining our streets drop massive amounts of leaves. The HOA contracted with a company called Clear Streets, Inc. to do regular street sweeping during the season. Normally, this was fine. The sweeper would come through, collect the leaves from the street and gutters, and dispose of them properly. But 3 days ago, I made the mistake of filing a formal complaint with the HOA about Patricia's harassment. I documented every fine, every letter, and every interaction. I sent copies to every board member and requested that Patricia recuse herself from any decisions involving my property. I cited the HOA's own bylaws about board member conflicts of interest and abuse of power. Patricia had not taken it well. The next day, I received a notice that my property had been selected for a special drainage assessment due to the slope of my backyard. According to the letter, water runoff from my property was allegedly causing erosion issues in the common area creek. I needed to pay $1,500 for a drainage study and potentially thousands more for remediation work. The notice gave me 48 hours to respond. I knew it was retaliatory garbage. My property had the same slope as 6 other houses on my street, none of which received similar notices. I also knew that the creek was part of a city watershed management area, and any actual erosion issues would be the city's responsibility, not mine. I drafted a response citing all of this, CC'd my attorney, and delivered it personally to Patricia's mailbox. That was yesterday evening. This morning, the street cleaner buried my driveway in wet leaves. I set down my coffee and walked outside in my slippers and bathrobe. The pile was even worse up close. The leaves were thick, matted, and already starting to smell like decay. Water dripped from the mass, creating muddy puddles on my concrete driveway. The whole thing had to weigh hundreds of pounds at least. The street sweeper was now at the end of the block, working its way back toward the main road. I pulled out my phone and took several photos and a video, making sure to capture the street sweeper's company name and unit number. Then, I called Clear Streets, Inc. A woman answered on the third ring. Clear Streets, this is Amanda. Hi Amanda, my name is Owen Garrett, and one of your street sweepers just dumped a massive pile of wet leaves across my driveway. I'm at 847 Oakmont Drive in the Riverside Meadows neighborhood. I need someone to come back and clean this up immediately. There was a pause and some keyboard clicking. I'm showing that unit completing its scheduled route in that area this morning. The driver is supposed to deposit collected material in designated areas only. Can you send me photos? Absolutely. What's your email? She gave me the address, and I sent the photos while we were still on the phone. Oh wow, she said after a moment. Yeah, that's definitely not supposed to happen. Let me call the driver and get his side of the story. I'll call you back within 15 minutes. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Mr. Garrett, this is Amanda from Clear Streets again. I spoke with the driver, and he claims he was following instructions provided by your HOA representative. Apparently, there was a work order to deposit leaves on your property as part of some kind of drainage project. That's complete nonsense, I said. There's no drainage project. This is harassment from the HOA president because I filed a complaint about her. I understand, but we have a signed work order here in our system. I'm really sorry, but unless you can get the HOA to retract the order, our hands are tied. We're contracted to follow the HOA's directions for services in your neighborhood. Can you send me a copy of this work order? I'll email it to you right now. The work order arrived 2 minutes later. Sure enough, it was on official Riverside Meadows HOA letterhead and signed by Patricia Moorehouse. It claimed that as part of the drainage assessment on my property, organic material needed to be deposited on my driveway to facilitate water absorption studies. It was the most ridiculous thing I had ever read, but it looked official enough that the street sweeping company had followed it. I immediately called my attorney, a sharp woman named Linda Torres who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. I had kept her on retainer after the harassment started escalating. This is a new level of petty, Linda said after I explained the situation and sent her the photos. And it's probably illegal. You can't just dump waste material on someone's property, even if you claim it's for a study. I'll draft a cease and desist letter and a formal demand for cleanup. I'll also add this to our harassment documentation. We're building a really strong case here, Owen. How long will cleanup take if we go the legal route? Realistically, with the weekend, probably 3 to 5 business days before we can get any kind of enforceable order. You could hire someone to remove it yourself and sue for the cost, but that's going to take months to recover. I thanked her and hung up, staring at the mountain of leaves. 5 days of having my driveway blocked was unacceptable. I had a car trapped in the garage and work meetings I needed to drive to next week. Plus, the leaves were already starting to stink. That's when I remembered the slope of my backyard and the drainage issue Patricia had tried to fabricate. If she wanted to play games with water management, I could play too. My property sat on a natural slope that ran down to a creek at the back of the neighborhood. During heavy rains, water flowed through my backyard and several others, eventually collecting in the creek bed. The creek itself was actually a drainage easement that handled stormwater for the entire development. The HOA maintained the area around the creek and had a small parking lot at the end of Oakmont Drive that they used for maintenance vehicles and equipment storage. Here's what Patricia apparently didn't know about my background. Before I became a software engineer, I had a degree in civil engineering. I had worked for 2 years with a firm that specialized in drainage and grading projects before I decided I preferred working with computers instead of construction sites. I knew exactly how water moved across a landscape and how to control it. I spent the rest of Saturday morning studying the topography of my property and the surrounding area. I walked the creek line, noting every inlet, outlet, and drainage pipe. I paid special attention to the HOA parking lot, which sat at a slightly lower elevation than my backyard, separated by about 200 feet of common area and the creek bed. The parking lot had a serious design flaw. Whoever had graded it had created a depression in the southwest corner where water naturally wanted to collect. There were storm drains, but they were undersized for the amount of water that could potentially flow into that area during a heavy rain. I had noticed before that the lot developed large puddles during storms. Currently, most of the water flowing through my property and the creek bed was diverted away from the parking lot by a series of natural berms and some strategic landscaping. The creek flowed under the parking lot through a large culvert and continued on to join the city's storm drain system. But those berms weren't protected features. They were just piles of dirt and rocks that had been shaped during the original construction. And the landscaping was just overgrown bushes and weeds on common property that anyone could modify. I went back inside and pulled up the HOA's own rules and regulations, which I had downloaded when I first moved in. I searched for any language about modifications to common areas and found exactly what I needed. Section 7.3 stated that residents may perform reasonable maintenance and improvement to common areas adjacent to their properties, including trimming, weeding, erosion control, and drainage management, provided such work does not damage infrastructure or adversely affect other properties. The language was intentionally vague, probably written to give residents flexibility to maintain the areas around their homes without needing constant HOA approval. Patricia had probably never imagined someone would use it the way I was about to. Sunday morning, I drove to a home improvement store and rented a sod cutter, a plate compactor, and bought several loads of fill dirt, sand, and drainage rock. I also purchased 6 10-foot sections of corrugated drainage pipe and various fittings. The clerk who helped me load everything was an older guy who had worked in landscaping for decades. "Big drainage project?" he asked. "Something like that. Just redirecting some water flow. Smart to do it before the heavy rains start." We're supposed to get a big system moving in from the Pacific this week. I had seen the same forecast. An atmospheric river event was predicted to hit Portland starting Wednesday night, with up to 6 inches of rain expected over 3 days. Perfect timing. Back at home, I started with the leaves on my driveway. Rather than paying someone to haul them away, I loaded them into contractor bags using a shovel in my hands. It took 4 hours of disgusting, smelly work, but I ended up with 37 bags of wet, rotting leaves. I stacked them in my backyard temporarily. Then I got to work on the real project. I walked down to the creek area with my tools and started at the natural berm that diverted water away from the parking lot. Using the sod cutter, I carefully removed the grass and weeds from the berm's surface, rolling it up in neat strips. I saved every piece. Next, I used a shovel to methodically remove the dirt and rocks that formed the berm, redistributing it to create a new channel. The channel was subtle, maybe 6 inches deep and 2 feet wide, but precisely graded to direct water flow toward the parking lot instead of away from it. I dug it at a perfect 2% grade, ensuring water would flow eagerly but not so fast as to cause obvious erosion. Where the new channel met the existing creek bed, I installed 3 of the drainage pipes, slightly angled to catch and concentrate the flow. The pipes ran underground through the common area and emerged just at the edge of the parking lot, positioned to dump water directly into the depressed southwest corner. I covered the pipes with the drainage rock for the first few feet, then buried them under the fill dirt, packing everything down hard with the plate compactor. Over the top of the disturbed area, I replaced the sod strips I had removed, watering them thoroughly and packing them down. To anyone walking by, it looked like nothing more than some maintenance work on the common area. The beauty of the design was in its subtlety. During normal rain, the new channel would only carry a modest increase in water flow to the parking lot, nothing that would seem unusual. But during a heavy rain event like the one predicted for this week, the channel would concentrate a massive amount of water from my property and 2 neighboring properties, funneling it all through those pipes directly into the parking lot's vulnerable corner. Monday, I continued refining the work. I adjusted grades, ensured the pipes were perfectly positioned, and even planted some new ground cover around the disturbed areas to make everything look intentional and maintained. I also installed the last 3 sections of pipe to extend the drain field and maximize water collection. Tuesday, I took my 37 bags of rotting leaves and strategically placed them along the new channel and around the pipe inlets, covering them with a thin layer of dirt and wood chips. As the bags broke down in the coming rain, they would create a natural mulch, but more importantly, they would add organic debris to the water flow. Anyone who had tried to dump garbage on my property deserved some garbage back. I also took before photos of the HOA parking lot, documenting its current dry condition and the slight puddles that already existed in the corner from recent light rain. Wednesday morning, I received another letter from Patricia. This one informed me that my complaint against her had been reviewed by the board and found to be without merit. Furthermore, I was being fined $200 for spreading false and defamatory statements about an HOA officer. The fine was due within 7 days. I photographed the letter and sent it to Linda, who responded with a string of angry emojis followed by, "This just keeps getting better for our case. Don't pay it. Let them try to put a lien on your house. I dare them." The rain started Wednesday evening, right on schedule. It began as a steady drizzle, then ramped up to a consistent downpour by nightfall. I stood at my back window, watching water sheet across my yard and flow down the slope. In the darkness, I couldn't see the creek or the parking lot, but I knew the water was finding its new path. Thursday morning, the rain was even heavier. Portland is used to rain, but this was exceptional even for us. The streets ran with water, and the gutters overflowed. I made coffee and checked the weather radar on my phone. The atmospheric river was stalled right over us, with another 2 days of heavy rain predicted. Around 10 in the morning, I walked down to the creek area with an umbrella, wearing rubber boots and a rain jacket. The creek was running fast and high, brown water churning through the channel. My new drainage system was working perfectly. Water was flowing into the pipes in a steady surge, and I could see the current directing toward the parking lot. I walked around to the parking lot itself and had to suppress a smile. The southwest corner was already flooded. What had been a minor puddle area was now a small pond about 30 feet across. Water was at least 6 inches deep and still rising. 2 HOA maintenance vehicles were parked on the far side of the lot, well away from the flood. A man in a yellow rain slicker was standing near the flooded area, scratching his head and looking confused. I recognized him as Tom Hendricks, the HOA's maintenance supervisor. He was a decent guy in his 60s who I had chatted with a few times. He looked frustrated. "Rough morning," I called out. He turned and waved. "You're telling me? This corner always gets some water, but I've never seen it this bad. Something must have changed with the drainage." "Probably just the heavy rain," I suggested innocently. "This is a pretty intense storm." "Yeah, but we've had worse storms and never seen flooding like this. I'm going to have to call a drainage contractor to come look at it. Patricia is already sending me texts every 5 minutes demanding I fix it." He rolled his eyes. I liked Tom. He was just a working guy trying to do his job while dealing with Patricia's constant demands. I almost felt bad about adding to his problems. Almost. "Good luck with that," I said. "And good luck with Patricia," he laughed. "Thanks, I'll need it." I went home and worked from my home office for the rest of the day, but I kept checking on the parking lot every few hours. The water kept rising. By evening, the flooded area had expanded to take up nearly a quarter of the parking lot. One of the maintenance vehicles had to be moved because water was lapping at its tires. Friday morning brought no relief from the rain. If anything, it was coming down harder. My yard was completely saturated, and water was flowing through my new drainage system like a river. I estimated that several hundred gallons per minute were being directed toward that parking lot. I was on a video call with a client around 11 when I saw flashing lights through my front window. A Portland Fire Bureau vehicle had arrived at the parking lot, followed by a city truck. I muted my microphone and cracked my window to listen. Voices carried across the distance, though I couldn't make out specific words. The fire crew was assessing the flooding, which had now spread across half the parking lot and was starting to threaten the small equipment shed the HOA used. The water looked at least a foot deep in places. 20 minutes later, as I was wrapping up my call, there was a pounding on my front door. I opened it to find Patricia standing there, absolutely soaked despite holding an umbrella. Her carefully styled hair was plastered to her head and her expression was furious. "This is your fault," she said without preamble. "Excuse me, the flooding, the parking lot. You did something to cause this, I know it." I gave her my most innocent look. "Patricia, I've been in my house working all week. I don't control the weather. The city engineers are down there right now, and they said something about changed drainage patterns. That's your property, isn't it? The water flows through your yard." "Water flows through a lot of yards," I said calmly. "It's a natural watershed. You were just telling me about drainage problems on my property, remember? Maybe you should check your own drainage infrastructure before you go blaming residents." Her face turned an impressive shade of red. "I know you did something. I'm going to prove it, and when I do, I'm going to make sure you're fined for every penny of damage." "That's interesting," I said, "because my attorney and I are preparing our own lawsuit against you and the HOA for harassment, illegal dumping, retaliatory fines, and abuse of power. That letter you sent me about my complaint, that's textbook retaliation. The leaves on my driveway, that's illegal dumping. I've got documentation of everything. You can't prove anything. Actually, I have photos, videos, emails, and witness statements. I also have the work order you submitted to the street sweeping company, which shows you deliberately ordered them to dump waste on my property under false pretenses. That's going to look great in court." Patricia opened her mouth, then closed it. She seemed to be struggling for words. Finally, she said, "You're going to regret this," turned and stalked back through the rain toward her car. I closed the door and went back to my window. The city crew was still working at the parking lot, now accompanied by 2 more vehicles. I could see them examining the creek culvert and the drainage system. An hour later, my doorbell rang again. This time, it was a man in his 30s wearing a City of Portland jacket and carrying a tablet. "Mr. Garrett, I'm Daniel Chen with Portland Stormwater Management. Do you have a few minutes to talk about the drainage situation?" "Of course," I said, inviting him in out of the rain. "Can I offer you some coffee?" "That would be great, thanks." We sat at my kitchen table, and he pulled up some maps on his tablet. "We're investigating the flooding at the HOA parking lot. The neighbors said water flows through your property to reach the creek, so I wanted to ask if you've noticed any changes recently." "The rain has been pretty intense," I said. "My yard is completely saturated, but the water has always flowed this way. It's the natural topography." "Right, I see that on the maps. The thing is, the parking lot has never flooded to this extent before, according to HOA records. So something has changed. Have you done any work on your property recently? Any grading or drainage modifications?" "I did some maintenance work on the common area near the creek," I admitted. "Cleared some weeds, evened out some erosion." The HOA's own rules allow residents to do reasonable maintenance on common areas adjacent to their property. Section 7.3. Daniel made some notes. "Can you show me what you did?" We walked down to the creek together in the pouring rain. I pointed out the areas where I had worked, showing him the cleaned-up zones and the erosion control measures I had taken. To his eyes, it all looked like reasonable property maintenance. "The thing is," he said, studying the water flow, "it looks like a lot more water is reaching that parking lot than it used to. The culvert under the lot is getting overwhelmed." "Is that my problem?" I asked. "The parking lot and culvert are HOA property. My understanding is that if their infrastructure can't handle normal drainage, that's their issue to fix." He sighed. "Technically, you're right. Natural water flow is protected. Property owners are allowed to direct water that naturally flows across their land, as long as they're not creating hazardous conditions or deliberately damaging another property. The question becomes whether what you did is natural or if you artificially concentrated the flow." "I did erosion control and maintenance," I said. "All on common property, which the HOA rules explicitly allow. I didn't dam anything up. I didn't build any structures. I just cleaned up the area and ensured water could flow naturally." Daniel looked at me for a long moment. He wasn't stupid. He clearly suspected I had done more than simple maintenance, but he also couldn't see any obvious artificial structures or prohibited modifications. "The HOA is probably going to have to upgrade their drainage system," he finally said. "That culvert is undersized for this kind of rain event, and with climate change, we're seeing more and more atmospheric rivers. They should have a bigger pipe and better management of that parking lot's grade. How much would that cost them, conservatively? Probably $60,000 to $80,000. They'll need to tear up the parking lot, replace the culvert, regrade everything, and repave. It's a significant project. I tried not to smile. $60,000 in unexpected costs would devastate the HOA's budget and likely require a special assessment that all the residents would have to pay. Patricia was not going to be popular when that news broke. After Daniel left, I called Linda and updated her on everything. She was delighted. "This is perfect," she said. "The HOA is facing a major expense because of their own infrastructure failures, and they can't blame you because you were just doing maintenance that their own rules allow. Meanwhile, we've got them dead to rights on harassment and illegal dumping. I think it's time to turn up the pressure. What did you have in mind?" "I'm going to send a demand letter to the HOA board and Patricia personally. We're going to demand they drop all fines against you, issue a formal apology, and pay you $5,000 in damages for the cost of dealing with their harassment. If they don't agree within 7 days, we file suit. $5,000 seems low for everything they've put me through." "It's a strategic number. It's high enough to hurt and to make a point, but low enough that fighting it would cost them more in legal fees. Most HOAs have insurance that covers settlements under $10,000, so their insurance company will probably just cut the check to make this go away. We're giving them an easy off-ramp. And if they don't take it, then we go for the throat. We file suit for harassment, emotional distress, illegal dumping, and abusive process. We'll ask for $25,000 in damages plus attorney fees. Discovery will be a nightmare for them, and everything will be on the record. Patricia's personal finances could be at risk too, since some of her actions were arguably outside the scope of her HOA duties." "Do it," I said. Linda drafted and sent the demand letter that same day. The rain continued through Friday night and into Saturday morning before finally beginning to taper off. I walked down to the parking lot Saturday afternoon to survey the damage. The water had receded somewhat, but the parking lot was a disaster. The entire southwest corner was underwater, with muddy water at least 6 inches deep covering maybe a third of the pavement. The water was full of leaves and debris, much of it from my 37 bags that had washed through the drainage system. The equipment shed had water damage on its lower walls, and the pavement throughout the lot was covered in mud and sediment. Several residents were standing around looking at the mess. I recognized a few neighbors and walked over to join them. "Can you believe this?" said a woman named Jennifer who lived 2 streets over. "The HOA meeting next week is going to be brutal. They're saying this is going to cost at least $50,000 to fix." "How did it even happen?" asked another neighbor, Mark. "Bad drainage design," I said, which was technically true. "The parking lot was never graded properly, and the culvert under it is too small. This storm just exposed the problems." "Great," Jennifer said. "So we're all going to have to pay a special assessment because the HOA cheaped out on drainage when they built this place." "Probably," I agreed. "Unless they've got enough reserves to cover it." "Fat chance," Mark said. "Patricia's been spending reserves on her pet projects for years. Remember when she had all the street signs replaced because she didn't like the font? That was like $15,000 from reserves that should have been saved for emergencies." The group grumbled in agreement. It seemed Patricia wasn't popular with anyone except maybe her closest friends on the board. Sunday was quiet. The rain had stopped, and the sun even made an appearance in the afternoon. I worked in my yard, doing some legitimate fall cleanup and maintenance. My drainage system had performed flawlessly, and the disturbed areas were already beginning to blend in with the surrounding landscape. Monday morning, I got a call from Linda. "You're not going to believe this," she said, excitement in her voice. "The HOA's attorney called me. They want to settle. Already." "Yep. Apparently the board met in emergency session last night. Between the flooding costs and our demand letter, they're in panic mode. They're offering to drop all fines, issue a written apology, and pay $3,000. You asked for $5. I did, and I told their attorney that $3 wasn't acceptable. We're going to counter at $4,000 plus they pay all your attorney fees to date, which is another $1,500. Take it or leave it, and they have 24 hours to decide." "You're amazing." "I know, but here's the even better part. I did some digging into the street sweeper incident. Clear Streets, Inc. is not happy about being used for what they now realize was an illegal dumping scheme. They're considering filing their own complaint against Patricia personally for misusing their services. If they do, it could rise to the level of criminal fraud." "Really?" "Yeah." She signed an official work order under false pretenses, claiming the dumping was for a legitimate drainage study. That's fraud, possibly conspiracy to commit illegal dumping. If Clear Streets pushes it, the police could get involved. I felt a surge of satisfaction. "Do we know if they're going to file?" "The owner is considering it. I spoke with him directly. He's worried about liability if you had decided to sue his company over the dumping. The fact that you didn't, and that you made clear the HOA president was behind it, earned you some goodwill. He's consulting with his attorney." Tuesday afternoon, Linda called back. "They took the deal. $5,500 total, all fines dropped, written apology from the board. The check should arrive by the end of the week." "What about Patricia?" "She's still the president for now, but 3 board members are calling for her resignation. The homeowners' meeting is Thursday night, and I'm hearing it's going to be packed. People are furious about the special assessment for the parking lot repairs." "Can I go to the meeting?" "Absolutely. You're a homeowner. You have every right to be there." Thursday evening, I walked to the community center where HOA meetings were held. The parking lot, at a different location from the flooded one, was completely full. I had to park 2 blocks away. Clearly, word had gotten out. Inside, the meeting room was standing room only. I counted at least 80 people crammed into a space designed for 50. The air was thick with tension and angry murmuring. Patricia sat at a table at the front with the other 4 board members. Steve Richardson, the vice president, Denise Hoffman, the treasurer, Marcus Powell, the secretary, and Linda Chen, a member at large. They all looked uncomfortable except Patricia, who wore her usual severe expression. Steve called the meeting to order and immediately moved to new business, clearly hoping to avoid the elephant in the room. But Jennifer from my neighborhood wasn't having it. "Point of order," she called out. "I move that we discuss the flooding situation and the special assessment before anything else." "Second," shouted Mark. "All in favor?" Steve asked reluctantly. A chorus of ayes filled the room. Steve sighed and yielded the floor to Denise, who pulled out a spreadsheet and projected it on the wall using a laptop and projector. The numbers were ugly. The flooding had caused approximately $72,000 in damage, including culvert replacement, parking lot repairs, equipment shed restoration, and drainage system upgrades. The HOA's reserves had only $40,000, which meant a special assessment of $32,000 split among the neighborhood's 160 homes. Every homeowner would need to pay $200 immediately. The room erupted in angry voices. "How did our drainage get so bad?" someone shouted. "Why weren't the reserves higher?" another voice called. "This is Patricia's fault," Jennifer yelled. She's been wasting money on nonsense while letting infrastructure fall apart. Patricia stood up, her face flushed. The flooding was not a failure of HOA management. It was caused by one homeowner's illegal modification of drainage patterns on his property. We are exploring legal action to recover costs from him. She was looking directly at me. Every head in the room turned to look at me too. "That's interesting," I said loudly enough to be heard. "Because the city engineer said your drainage infrastructure was improperly designed and undersized. He said the flooding would have happened in any major storm regardless of what anyone did on their property. Natural water flow is protected by law. You deliberately redirected water to cause this," Patricia snapped. "Did I? Or did I just do some maintenance on the common area, which Section 7.3 of your own rules explicitly allows? Because that's what the city engineer saw when he inspected my work." "This is all beside the point," Marcus, the secretary, interrupted. He was a thin man in his 50s who looked exhausted. "Whether we like it or not, the damage is done and we need to pay for repairs. The special assessment is necessary." "What about Patricia's harassment of Mr. Garrett?" Jennifer asked. "I've heard she's been fining him constantly for made-up violations." "That's absolutely untrue," Patricia said. I stood up. "Actually, it's completely true. I have documentation of over $800 in frivolous fines over 6 months for things like my mailbox being the wrong shade of black and my trash can being visible for 15 minutes too long. I also have evidence that Patricia ordered a street sweeping company to dump 3 tons of wet leaves on my driveway under false pretenses, which is illegal dumping. The HOA has already agreed to settle with me for harassment and to drop all fines." The room erupted again. People were shouting questions at Patricia, demanding answers. Several people were yelling for her resignation. Steve banged a gavel on the table. "Order! Everyone calm down." It took 5 minutes to restore order. When the room finally quieted, Denise spoke up. "For the record, the settlement with Mr. Garrett is real. The board voted to approve it on Monday. We're paying $5,500 plus, dropping all fines against him." "Why wasn't this disclosed to the membership?" someone demanded. "It was a legal matter handled in executive session," Denise said. "We're disclosing it now." "I move for Patricia's immediate removal as president," Jennifer called out. "And I move that we launch an independent audit of all fines and enforcement actions she's taken in the past year." "Second." Multiple voices shouted. Steve looked at Patricia, who was white-faced and trembling with rage. "Patricia, do you want to respond?" "This is a witch hunt," she said, her voice shaking. "I have done nothing but enforce the rules and try to maintain property values in this neighborhood. If people don't like following rules, maybe they should live somewhere without an HOA. The rules need to be enforced fairly," Mark called out, "not used as weapons against people you don't like." "I call the question on Jennifer's motion," someone yelled. Steve looked around the room. "All in favor of removing Patricia Moorehouse as HOA president and conducting an audit of her enforcement actions, say aye." The ayes were overwhelming, probably 90% of the room. Opposed, a handful of people, probably Patricia's friends, said no. "The ayes have it," Steve said. "Patricia, you're removed as president effective immediately. Please turn over all HOA documents and property to me by the end of the week." Patricia stood up, grabbed her purse, and stormed out of the room without another word. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The meeting continued for another hour, covering the special assessment, the audit plans, and the election of a new president. Steve was unanimously elected to take over as president, with Linda Chen moving up to vice president. As people were leaving, several neighbors came up to thank me for standing up to Patricia. "Someone needed to," Jennifer said. "She's been a tyrant for years. I'm just glad it's finally over." I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. The harassment was done. I was getting my money back. Patricia was out of power, and the parking lot flooding, while unfortunate for everyone's wallets, had been the catalyst needed to finally expose the HOA's dysfunction. The settlement check arrived the following Tuesday, along with a formal letter of apology signed by Steve on behalf of the board. They acknowledged that the enforcement actions against me had been excessive and that the leaf dumping incident was inappropriate. They also confirmed all fines were dropped and expunged from my record. I deposited the check and sent a thank you note to Linda for her excellent work. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Daniel Chen at the city. "Mr. Garrett, I wanted to give you a heads up. Clear Streets, Inc. filed a complaint with the Portland Police Bureau against Patricia Moorehouse for fraud and conspiracy to commit illegal dumping. They actually did it. They did." The company's owner was worried about potential liability and decided the best defense was to make clear they were duped. The DA's office is reviewing the case now. What happens to Patricia? If the DA decides to prosecute, she could be charged with fraud, which is a misdemeanor, and potentially illegal dumping, which can be a misdemeanor or felony depending on the amount of waste involved. She'd likely get probation and fines if convicted, but it'll be on her record. Thanks for letting me know. A month later, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia had been charged with 2 misdemeanor counts, fraud and illegal dumping. She pled no contest to both charges and received 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a $3,000 fine. She and her husband listed their house for sale shortly after. The HOA's drainage repairs were completed in December, right before the next round of winter storms. The new system worked perfectly, with no flooding at all even during heavy rains. The special assessment was painful for everyone, but at least it was a one-time cost. As for my drainage modifications, they remained in place. During lighter rains, they didn't make any noticeable difference to the parking lot. But I knew that if we ever got another atmospheric river event, my system would activate and send plenty of water to test the HOA's shiny new drainage infrastructure. I considered it a long-term insurance policy against future harassment. The new board under Steve's leadership took a much more reasonable approach to enforcement. They focused on actual issues like abandoned vehicles and serious property maintenance problems, rather than measuring grass height with rulers or checking mailbox paint colors with spectrometers. The neighborhood became much more peaceful. I actually started to enjoy living in Riverside Meadows. I got to know my neighbors better, joined a couple of the social committees, and even volunteered to help with the spring landscaping workday. Without Patricia's toxic presence, the HOA functioned the way it was supposed to, as a way for neighbors to work together to maintain shared spaces and handle common issues. 6 months after the whole incident, I was working in my front yard on a Saturday morning when Jennifer stopped by while walking her dog. "I heard Patricia's moving to Seattle," she said. "The house sold last week." "Good for her," I said diplomatically. Jennifer laughed. "You're more generous than I am. But seriously, thank you for standing up to her. A lot of us were too afraid to fight back. You showed us it was possible." "I just wanted to live in peace," I said, "and maybe redirect a little water," she grinned. "That flooding was awfully convenient timing, wasn't it? Mother Nature works in mysterious ways." "Sure she does," Jennifer winked. "Well, have a good weekend, and if you ever need a favor, let me know. Half the neighborhood owes you one." After she left, I stood there looking at my house, my yard, and my neighborhood. The Craftsman home still looked beautiful. The trees were budding with spring growth. The The creek behind my house burbled peacefully, flowing through channels both natural and modified. I had come to Portland looking for peace and quiet, and I had found it, eventually. But not before learning some valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, understanding the rules better than the people trying to enforce them, and the fluid dynamics of water management. I smiled, picked up my gardening tools, and went back to work. The grass needed mowing, but I would make sure to keep it at exactly the approved height. Not because I was afraid of Patricia anymore, but because some rules actually made sense. Others, well, those were open to interpretation. And creative engineering solutions. The leaves from last autumn had long since decomposed in the parking lot's drainage system, adding nutrients to the soil downstream. My driveway was pristine. My cars were no longer trapped in the garage. And somewhere in Seattle, Patricia was undoubtedly measuring her new neighbor's grass with a ruler and wondering why HOA boards in Washington weren't as accommodating as the one she had ruled in Oregon. I didn't wish her ill, but I didn't wish her well either. I simply wished her far away, which was exactly where she was. As for me, I had everything I needed. A beautiful home, reasonable neighbors, a functional HOA board, and a drainage system that worked exactly as designed. Sometimes justice flows like water, finding its level and following the path of least resistance. And sometimes, when the path needs a little adjustment, it just takes someone with the right skills and motivation to do some creative maintenance on the common areas. I had learned to play the HOA game and win, not by breaking rules, but by understanding them better than anyone else. Not by being aggressive, but by being strategic. And not by seeking revenge, but by simply redirecting problems back to their source. The forecast called for clear weather for the next week, with only light showers possible. My drainage system would rest, barely noticeable, waiting for the next big storm. And when that storm came, whenever it came, the HOA parking lot would handle it just fine. Unless, of course, someone on the new board decided to harass me about my grass height or my mailbox color. Then we might need to do some more maintenance on the common areas. Section 7.3 did explicitly allow it, after all, but that was unlikely. Steve was a reasonable guy, and the new board had learned from Patricia's mistakes. They knew that working with homeowners was easier than working against them. They knew that petty enforcement created enemies rather than compliance. And they definitely knew that messing with someone who understood both HOA bylaws and civil engineering was a very bad idea. I put away my tools, went inside, and made myself a sandwich. Through the window, I could see my backyard sloping down to the creek, the water flowing peacefully through its natural and modified channels. Everything was exactly as it should be. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just making sure that anyone who tries to bury you gets buried by their own actions instead. Patricia had tried to bury my driveway in wet leaves. In the end, she buried herself under the weight of her own harassment, fraud, and the flooding she blamed me for causing. I had just helped the water find its way.